everybody, my name is Jameson Detweiler. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fantasmo. We're building an open platform to 3D map every building on Earth. So this is the map data that we have today. It's carried us pretty well to this point, but there's a problem. If you're playing Pokemon Go, it doesn't know if it's on the ground, if it's on a table, or if it's a gigantic character in the middle of a baseball field. The issue here is that our devices don't have any concept of the layout of our spaces. We need 3D data, and thankfully, our mobile devices are getting 3D sensors as well as 6 degree of freedom tracking, or SLAM, on them now. This is the first commercially available Google Tango phone, and there's a number of, there's quite a few more coming out this summer and this fall, with Apple not too far behind. You're looking about 20% market penetration by 2020 for all phones. So who's Fantasmo? First, we're a pretty stacked team with 3 PhDs with a lot of very relevant publications. We've had 2 exits under our belts, and we surround ourselves with some great advisors in the location and mapping space. We really have 3 key things that make up what we do. We have a spatial mapping SDK and cloud, an open spatial map database and API, and a solution for large-scale spatial mapping. So the first part, let's focus on that. This is Elon on our team in my living room. He's actually got our SDK on a Google Tango phone there. You see that on the left side. He quickly maps out the space. He does this in about 3 minutes. So what ends up happening here is you get this not so beautiful looking point cloud. Our pipeline cleans this up, then we segment it out, and we're able to identify the floors, the walls, we're able to segment out the furniture. We're moving towards semantic labeling and understanding of the space. And then we create even sort of a simplified storage format to access the structure of the data, as well as meshes. One of our customers, Joybird, is using this to help their customers visualize their furniture inside of people's own homes to see if a couch fits and what it looks like. Okay, the second part is an open spatial map database and API. So not only do we have the SDK that people can use at home, we can go into, say, a Starbucks who asked us to come into their Reserve store in LA and create a demo for them. This is a map that we created. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes. We actually just redid this in a store here in New York, and we're showing a demo of this to them tomorrow. And what you do is you take that point cloud, you can download it through our API or from our web platform, you can drop it into Unity, and then you can place spatially referenced content inside the space. You can then push that out to a Google Tango-enabled phone and eventually iOS phones. And you can actually, this is a screen recording from the phone, by the way. You can have the spatially anchored content that you can see throughout the space. So Starbucks is interested. They're looking at how they increase engagement in the stores and tell the story of the products that are inside of here. The pipeline to get to this demo is hours. You know, if you had to do this on your own, this would be weeks, if not months. Okay. So the last part is the large-scale spatial mapping. Obviously, using a phone to walk around and scan a very large space is not going to be efficient. So we're able to import data from LiDAR-based devices such as this in combination with other data that we collect with these mobile devices. We then create profiles for these online in a GitHub-like fashion. It can be public, it can be private. The owner of the data has complete control over how it's used and who has access to it. So not only can they build first-party applications on this, but if you go back to that example with Pokemon Go, that Niantic, who publishes Pokemon Go, could request access to the space, this space, or Starbucks, and they could grant access to them so that they could actually create content that's aware of the environment. So our mission is to spatially map every building on Earth, democratize mapping buildings of all sizes, and to be the location DNS. And thank you, Evan, for that one.
Okay, well done. Judges.
So you mentioned Starbucks. Tell me about how many clients you've got, revenue, what your go-to-market plan is.
Sure. So we have one customer with Joybird on the SDK side, and then on the actual location-based side, we're just in like demo and pilot phase. So we have Starbucks, Disney Store, a company called Beta, which is sort of a new reinvention of retail, and USC. So there's a lot of applications there, even on the 2D wayfinding side, and a lot more interest than we're kind of able to handle right now.
So first of all, a little bit of feedback, because I would try to slow down, because that was really fast with a lot to process. But really interesting what you're working on. Can you share a little bit more about the competitive set? Who's doing this and how far ahead are they?
So obviously people like to think that like Google and Apple are kind of in the space and what they're doing. And the reality of it is that those players are actually going to expect that the building supplies the data. And there's going to be a half a dozen to a dozen companies that require this data exists, as well as like ADA and for accessibility reasons and other things. So We see this opportunity as sort of the middleman to help the businesses make sure that that data is up to date. They're also not going as deep on the data as we are. So on that side, you have companies that do the capture like Matterport and other things like that, but we're looking beyond that. What is it that you do with this data? What is the file structure? What is the version control? How do we handle access? And we don't know anybody that's in that space at this point.
Where'd you come up with the name Fantasmo?
Basically just sort of this retro futuristic thing. We actually started out as a games company with the idea to build Pokemon Go essentially back in 2009 with an original IP, and so we wanted something fun and retro futuristic, and we've kept it since. And it's 3 syllables in phonetic, so.
How are you charging Starbucks?
It's still pilot phase. We'll see how they do that. Probably basically the access to the data on top. So our goal is to be able to come into retailers and a lot of those spaces and do the mapping for free. And it's the value that they get on top of it. So if they drop the SDK into their app, they can also track from pockets because we index the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and magnetic signals too. So you can get all this data about like dwell times and things like that. And we may retain some of that data and build a BI business on top of it. But on the other side, any data that's private, you pay for, right? If it's a publicly registered data set, like ultimately, this is a game of like digital monopoly. If we can capture retail properties and venues and things like that, it's what you do with it that matters, and then the rest of the spaces come. So we're just trying to get to these properties as quickly as possible.
Is it fair to say that the value for you isn't in the 3D scanning, but the platform of 3D spaces that are then collected and your ability to control that platform?
Yeah, exactly. We want to be the pipes that this data runs through. I mean, it's like the end game here is a constantly updating 3D model of the world, right? Where we're actively tracking. Even every person in here can feed that back into a game engine or whatever you want to use. And that's how you literally merge the digital world and the physical world. It's the AR ad layer. It's the next platform.
Yeah, so part of your thesis is that depth sensors coming on consumer devices will enable that. How do you plan to make sure that you are getting all those scans?
So I mean, those platforms have to actually expose that, right? So like you can't block us out of it. At the end of the day, like there's actually if you look at like Tango and like all the applications that are on there currently, there's no mapping solution in there, and HoloLens has some. They have no cloud storage. No one deals with the privacy implications. So if you're an AR game developer and you want to create a game that goes throughout my home, and you want to have the user map that, the user might do that once or twice, but then they're going to expect that it exists somewhere. That AR game developer also does not want to take on the liability of storing that data. So if you look at this, there's a major, like this is, I think, going to be like PCI compliance. No one stores credit card data. No one will want to store this data unless you're specialized around it.
One last question. Anybody have one last question? Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I understand the argument that sort of personal spaces you could own and people would scan them themselves. But in public spaces, right, Google Maps sort of drives their cars around and owns that public space. So wouldn't the same thing be true of like malls and retail spaces?
No, Google won't even take 2D map data in without a signature from the owner or the manager of it. They also get that data from third parties. So Google, if you talk to the right people there, they don't expect to actually go get this data all on their own. And so no, they can't. And this is like a gray area that like we can leverage for the time being to help with the crowdsourcing. But ultimately, legislation I think is going to end up giving the real estate owner control over this data.
Okay. Round of applause. Thank you, Jameson, very much.